right, well, welcome to Trump News. I mean 5 on 20 News, where everything is Trump anyway, so we might as well call it Trump News. I'm Ty Besh.
And I'm Rich Gary. It's 5 p.m. on Thursday, March 23rd, and we're coming to you live from the Creative Tucson studio in downtown Tucson. First, let's talk local headlines.
Let's talk them. Immigration advocates from Arizona stormed Washington, D.C. yesterday to show their resistance to the Trump administration's policies. The groups came as a part of a 3-day summit to organize grassroots resistance to what they call abuses by Customs and Border Protection Agency. Speakers such as Donna De La Cruz of the FAR Immigration Reform Movement said that the agency is, quote, out of control. She pointed to the seizure of phones at airports, deportation raids, and government threats to separate families at the border. About 200 organizers showed up from 33 states, including Arizona. FIRM Director Solma Arias said that the summit aimed to develop strategies to fight against Trump's immigration policies and see how the different groups can work together.
An Arizona federal appeals court rejected 2 cases to the Navajo Generation Station in the northern part of the state. One case concerned a challenge by environmental advocates who said the EPA didn't require the use of the best current retrofit technology, known as BART, B-A-R-T, when the agency was developing emissions limits. Advocates such as the Sierra Club and others say that the EPA's plans didn't go far enough and said they were disappointed when the court's with the court's decisions. Sandy Barr, director of the Arizona chapter of the Sierra Club, said that the EPA's proposal does not protect clean air for those living near the plant. The second case, rejected by the appeals court, concerned a challenge by the Hopi tribe, who claim they were left out of the EPA's emissions discussions. The Navajo Generation Station has become a controversial issue in Arizona because, on one hand, it provides jobs for tribe members in the area, including Navajo and Hopi. The plant provides 1,400 to 1,900 jobs for the Hopi alone. On the other hand, the plant uses coal, which is quickly going out of style due to the massive carbon emissions that contribute to climate change. Last month, it was announced that the plant would cease to operate after 2019. Activists collectively threw up their hands and said they couldn't figure out who to support in the situation.
The Arizona Secretary of State is trying to develop a new website that will track political campaign funding in the state, but needs funding to do so. Michelle Regan's office is seeking $462,000 to set up the site, plus $50,000 per year to maintain it. This comes after Regan tried to set up a similar site last year, spending $494,000 on a site that was never actually released. Matt Roberts, a spokesperson for the Secretary of State's office, says that the project is a continuation rather than a restart. Maybe they have some of the code still. Midnest, a Scottsdale-based software company, was originally hired to develop the site, which would serve as a web portal to make it easier to track political donations. The site would also make it easier for political campaigns to file the proper forms and reports. It was supposed to be released before May 2016, but was later delayed until November 2017. However, on March 17th, proposal released by Regan, it looks like through her office, will be designating a totally new system. The Clean Elections Commission, who Regan is asking money from, will discuss the proposal at Regan's office on March 23rd. But CCEC Director Tom Collins says the commission has already spent $500,000 and he hasn't seen any evidence of anything coming from that spending. Wonderful. No word yet on whether Midnest's work will be used for the new project. Also no word yet on where the $500,000 went. Although Midnest CEO has been seen wearing a mink coat and a top hat with a dollar sign emblazoned on the front.
Mine operators in Arizona claim that the United States regulations are making it harder to operate in the state and need to be loosened. Nigel Stewart, managing director at the Resolution Copper Mine, told the House of Natural Resources Subcommittee that the mine should be operating, but is still years away because of permitting laws. He said the permitting procedures are, quote, outdated and insufficient, and provided a barrier to mining companies. He said that the Rio Tinto area has already spent $1.3 billion on the Resolution project for permitting, studies, and project. studies and project shaping and is still years away from opening. Stewart said that if this were another country, then the mine would be ready to operate. But Arizona Representative Raul Grijalva responded that regulations are necessary to protect the public from environmental dangers and potential health hazards. Stewart spoke at a hearing titled "The Importance of Domestically Sourced Raw Materials for Infrastructure Project." Representative Paul Gosier delivered the opening statement where he said that, quote, "Artificial delays have caused a time-consuming permit process that is wasting our nation's resources." He said that while the United States can be self-sufficient, the United States regulation system makes it difficult and causes the United States to be dependent on other countries for natural resources. According to Gosier, an average mine operation takes 7 to 10 years to get online due to the regulation system. He said that the longer an operation takes, the less likely it is to attract investment, which makes it less likely that it will be successful. Grijalva countered Gosier's argument by pointing out that Resolution benefited from a land swap with the federal government, which he called a, quote, "sweetheart deal." The land includes Oak Flat, a site that local Apache tribes considered sacred land and have been trying to protect against mining interests. Grijalva asked Stewart how much of the copper mined from Resolution would actually be used domestically. Stewart responded that the copper would be smelted in Utah, but didn't know how much would be exported because it depends on demand. Grijalva was satisfied with the answer because he said that hearing was supposed to be about mining companies using the natural resources in the United States. Stewart responded that they will be using them in the United States, then shipping them off somewhere else.
Sounds familiar. The Tucson City Council passed a new ordinance that bans using electronic devices while driving. But hold on. Under Ordinance 11442 or 11442, being caught using an electronic device such as a phone would be a secondary offense. This means that police would not be able to pull you over just for using your phone or for the offense, but rather would need to stop the motorist for another reason. Every member of the council voted for the ordinance except for Steve Kozachick and Richard Fimber, who thought that the law doesn't go far enough. Tucson Police Chief Chris Magnus also thinks the law doesn't go far enough and thinks that electronics use should be a primary offense, so they would pull you over just for using your phone. The council said they will visit the rule in 6 months to see if they should upgrade to a primary offense. The ordinance goes into effect May 1st, 2017, when Tucson police think there will be a sudden increase in broken taillights. The council also updated the so-called red tag rule, also known as the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance, which deals with unruly gatherings. The ruling allows police to issue red tags for loud partying, which comes with a fine that is capped at $1,000. And finally, the council finalized its hate crime ordinance that covers misdemeanor crimes such as damage to schools, synagogues, and churches. Hate crimes can now be punished with a fine of $2,500 and 40 days in jail for repeated offenses. If the offender commits a hate crime while texting and driving, they will be sentenced to death, which is fair.
Definitely.
Yeah, you're taking other people's lives in your hand. Hands. Sorry.
An Arizona Republican is pushing for tax breaks for the state's manufacturing firms. Chandler Representative Jeff Weininger proposed a bill that extends a job creation tax for the big companies that was set to expire in 2025. The bill also gives further tax credits through depreciation for firms such as Intel, who already receive a sizable tax break. Intel would be able to use depreciation to reduce their property taxes. It also indefinitely extends a research and development tax credit that was set to be reduced next year. Weininger resubmitted the bill after a previous bill was rejected by the House because of the $20 million cost. The new bill takes out a provision that would have let companies use the leftover R&D credits to lower their sales tax bill. Another provision left out was one where companies would be able to cash in existing tax credits if they didn't need them. But the new bill will still cost the state a substantial amount of money. The depreciation provision would cost the state $1.5 million in 2019 alone. The R&D tax credits cost have not yet been calculated. Intel says that it looks forward to bleeding the state dry, then relocating in 10 years to leaving behind ghost towns, which would then become a tourist attraction.
Those are big moneymakers, actually.
Big moneymakers.
Yeah, ghosts. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about the program you're watching right now. Here at 5 on 20, we are undertaking a new kind of citizen journalism. We're going to give you the news as we see it, and him and Joel. We want more people to speak up with us, so please come help us. We need writers, hosts, anchors, camera people, sound people, the whole gamut, everybody. The times require a new way of informing ourselves, so join us. Do it now, please. Email us at info@creativetucson.org. You can trust us to get involved, and if you think there's a story we're missing, a person we should interview, an upcoming event we should cover, or have any news tips for us, shoot us an email again at info@creativetucson.org. Trustworthy. We are here for you, and we want to cover all stories from all points of views, so don't be strangers. Now, let's get to national and international news.
Don't be strangers.
Yes.
London police identified yesterday's attacker as Khalid Massoud, who was from Birmingham, England, and had a long criminal history. Prime Minister Theresa May said that Massoud was a, quote, peripheral figure who had been examined by the M15, the United Kingdom spy agency, but was not investigated further. Massoud did have prior charges of terrorism, but did have a history of crime in his native Birmingham, ranging from assault, weapons possession, and public disturbances. British officials are assuming that Massoud was motivated by Islamic ideology. ISIS was quick to confirm this, calling Massoud a, quote, soldier of the terrorist group. However, officials think it's more likely that this was a copycat attack inspired by the group rather than Massoud being a member of ISIS. They based their opinion on a low-tech style that the attack and because ISIS ended their open enrollment period a few months back.
Ooh. No shame in that joke. An Israeli teenager with U.S. citizenship was arrested this morning in connection with a series of bomb threats against Jewish community centers across the country. A police spokesperson, said that the teenager, who is from southern Israel, made similar threats in Australia and New Zealand, including one call that caused a plane to make an emergency landing. Police did not reveal how many of the calls were made by the teen, nor did they release his name. The search took so long because authorities say that the suspect used camouflage technologies that masked his voice and the origin of the call. They say that he made the calls using the internet and used Tor, or the darknet, or software that allows anonymity. Right. When authorities searched his house, they confiscated computers, an antenna, and other equipment that could have been used for the operation. People still use antennas. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that the suspect was not drafted by the Israeli military because he was deemed unfit to serve. Alt-right leader Richard Spencer said that even he didn't see that coming and that he was sure it was one of his people. Donald Trump said he's glad they caught the guy, and he will be inquiring to see if the teenager helped Obama spy on him over the summer. He sent him a message, DM, on Twitter. DM'd him.
Instagram?
Yeah, no, Twitter. He uses Twitter.
Not Instagram. The Senate reversed an Obama administration rule that limited hunting on national wildlife refuges in Alaska. That month, the House already voted to overrun the rule, also on a party line vote. The bill now travels to the president's desk, where he's expected to sign because, as we know, he loves to sign things. The rule had prohibited so-called predator control operations in 16 Alaskan refuges owned by the federal government. Prohibitions including a ban on aerial hunting, live trapping, or baiting of animals such as bears and wolves. It also prohibited killing animals near their dens or cubs. The bill was sponsored by Republican Representative Don Young, who said the law represented federal overreach. This is the same Don Young who once publicly called Hispanics, quote, wetbacks, and who is considered the most corrupt politician 4 times by Group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW. But Young wasn't alone in pushing for the bill. Fellow Republican Senator Dan Sullivan said that the rule changed the state's relationship from one of cooperation to one of subservience. But Democrats disagree with this narrative. Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington said that it's not about states' rights, but about managing wildlife refuges to the degree that agencies believe are necessary for preservation. Alaskan officials said that the debate brings up a fundamental difference of opinion. On one side, hunters want to retain population numbers for hunting, while the other side thinks that the goal is to increase biodiversity. Hunters target predators such as bears and wolves to sustain the population of elk, moose, and caribou, so they can shoot them. So who's right in this debate? As usual, the side with the most money. To celebrate the passing of the bill, Don Young shot 7 wolf cubs and left them dangling off a tree for all the others to see.
You know, you got a name like Crew, you can figure it out. You can get those refuges figured out. So the Secret Service requested an additional $60 million in its 2018 budget to protect the Trump family and cover travel costs, according to documents obtained by the Washington Post. $26.8 million would have been used to protect the first family in their Trump Tower hideaway, while $33 million would be used to cover costs for travel for the president, vice president, and visiting heads of state. But before you start yelling at the TV or your computer, it's worth stating that the Office of Management and Budget declined the request. The request comes at a time when our golfer-in-chief traveled to his Mar-a-Lago club on 5 separate weekends already. And here's where you can start yelling again. If the Secret Service doesn't receive the additional funds, then they will have to pull from other resources, such as cybercrime and money counterfeiting cases, according to the Post. Yes, that's right. We're going to take money away from the cybercrime at a time when we're being preyed upon by Russian hackers so that our president can wear puffy white pants and play golf. Sounds like a fair trade-off, which he is good at golf, though. We're being biased. He's really good at golf.
He should be getting better.
He has a great swing.
United States-led airstrike against the Islamic State killed 33 civilians in a Syrian city of Raqqa. Many of the people killed were fleeing fighting in another part of the city. This raised concerns about the new rules of engagement that makes it easier for civilians to be caught in the crossfire of military strikes focused on war zones. This comes a week after the United States strike on a mosque in Syria, which caused the death of at least 52 people. Syrian activists say that the attack on the school is in the same area that was under attack last week by the United States-backed Kurdish forces, which aimed to break the last ISIS stronghold in Syria. One witness said the school held survivors from the last attack who had taken shelter in the building. The Trump administration is seeking new rules that would allow the Pentagon to approve attacks without permission. They would also only need to prove that there is a, quote, near certainty that civilians wouldn't be attacked. This is a change from the former policy, which forced officials to prove with complete certainty that there wouldn't be civilians. As you can tell, there's a lot of legal wiggle room with the new rules. Over the past 8 months, there have been 4 cases where the United States has been blamed for mass civilian casualties in Syria, including one in July in the town of Manbij. Where up to 150 civilians were killed. At this rate, we're creating terrorists faster than we can get rid of them. Maybe Trump confused creating terrorists with creating jobs. Slam.
Yeah, slam. Yesterday was a proud day for women across the country as conservative nonprofit group Independent Women's Forum gave their first ever Working for Women award. Of the many strong independent women on the conservative side of the political spectrum who were well deserving of this honor, the award went to none other than Vice President Mike Pence. According to IWF spokesperson Victoria Colley, quote, Vice President Pence's name was at the top of the list, given his track record of advocating for free markets and limited government, including rolling back heavy taxation and regulation. And we all know how gaga skirts go for free markets and limited government. If this decision has your panties in a twist, allow me to mansplain a few points thank God Anais wasn't reading this, you may or may have overlooked, or may not have. For one thing, Pence is anti-abortion. As we all know, roughly half of all aborted fetuses would have eventually developed into full-grown women if not for liberal interference, which is true. As governor, Pence signed new abortion restrictions into law, including the right for women seeking abortions to be forced to view the fetal ultrasound and listen to its heartbeat. As a congressman, Pence supported the right of women in the workplace to make less than their male counterparts. Way to go. He voted down every equal pay mandate that came across his desk, including the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act in 2007. Pence's pro-woman stance extends back longer than his political career. as a conservative talk radio host in 1999. I was 8 years old. Pence argued that women should not serve in the military. Wow, he's so wise. Pence's stance leaned heavily on the Disney movie Mulan. Mulan is a story of a fictional cartoon woman who disguises herself as a man so she can join the military and ends up falling in love with her superior officer. What a story. In an op-ed that accompanied his radio show, Pence once wrote, many young men find many young women to be attractive. So this is going to be many young men find young women sexually attractive. Many young women find many young men to be attractive sexually. Put them together in close quarters for long periods of time, and things will get interesting. Also, so wise, just like they eventually did for young Mulan. Moral of the story: women in military, bad idea, obviously. We here at 5 on 20 would like to thank Mike Pence for being a living example of the true definition of feminism. Way to go, Mike. Independent Women's Forum. You sure know how to pick them. This was Ty Besh.
And Rich Gary for 5 on 20 News. Next up, Andrew explains it all. What's wrong with things getting in?
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Andrew Explains It All. I'm Andrew Conlog, and on this segment, my job is to explain something that has to do with Tucson or Southern Arizona or Arizona history or culture. And your job is to listen and enjoy it and hopefully have a fun time learning with me. And today, we are going to have a fun time because I'm going to do another biography of a real interesting Arizona character. His name was William Claude Jones, usually known as W. Claude Jones, and he's famous for coming up with the name Arizona. And that won't take a lot of time to talk about. You're probably thinking, well, I'll tell you about the rest of his crazy life, because he really was like one of those insane, larger-than-life, itinerant adventurer dudes that made their way to Arizona at this time. So here we go, W. Claude Jones. Now, a good way to start a biography, you might think, is where they were born and who their parents were and that kind of stuff. And I agree, except nobody knows what the story is with this guy. Throughout his later life, he told like 4 or 5 different versions of the story of where he came from, who his parents were, and nobody has any proof on what the accurate one is. One interesting point, though, is that he did from an early age know Spanish. He knew how to speak it, he knew how to write it, and you might not think that's too weird, except we're fairly sure he was born in the Midwest or the east of the Mississippi probably, and that is kind of unusual for the time. Anyway, who knows? We don't. But we do know that the historical record for him starts with the Seminole War. That was a conflict before the Civil War where the U.S. fought against Native Americans, the Seminoles, in Florida, and he was a soldier, and we can prove that. And after his time in the Seminole War, he went back, or for the first time, to Missouri, where he married for the first time. Now, I say the first time because this dude had 5 wives. He wasn't a polygamist, he had 5 wives over the course of his life, so I'm probably gonna do a little wife counter throughout this. So, bing, wife number 1, a lady named Sarah Freeman. And he had a son who he named Bennington, and he had a daughter, and he got elected to the state senate of Missouri, and he was so happy. Actually, he wasn't, he hated it. So he basically, he was still a senator, he was still married, but he just left Missouri and just kind of started wandering around to the ends of the earth at that time, through Texas, through California. He was just kind of going all over the place except his actual home and job. And he took to writing to the president of the United States at this time and just wrote letters saying that he wanted a federal appointment. And he literally said, any federal appointment, give me a federal job, I don't care what it is, just give it to me because I want it. And weirdly enough, because I feel like if I was the president, I just would ignore a dude that kept doing that, but the president did eventually acquiesce to that request, and he appointed him the federal attorney for the territory of New Mexico. So he went wherever he was at the time to New Mexico, never to return to Missouri as far as we know, and started his job, and immediately started to make enemies, because his first idea that he got there was that the territory of New Mexico, which if you remember from some of the other segments that I've done, if you've watched those, at this time the territory of New Mexico was all of modern Arizona and all of modern New Mexico, so it was a big old territory. He thought, let's split that territory up. Let's divide it along a line east-west. That was kind of a more popular idea than what happened now, modern times, with the north-south division. And let's call it the territory of Pimeria, which is the Spanish name for part of this area, especially around Tucson, for the Pima Native Americans, the modern, or I guess actual name of the Tohono O'odham Native Americans. But Pime, Pimeria, and W. Claude Jones, as you'll see, was into history. He was a weird history geek like me, and so let's take this old name and start a territory. And I mentioned the enemies because, as you might imagine, the New Mexico territorial government wasn't real happy about that. They didn't want their giant territory to be split up because then they'd only have half a territory to govern. So people really didn't like this guy. Well, actually some people, because he also made some friends, because there was a group of people who liked this idea and did want a new territory. And one of them was a guy named Charles Poston. You may have heard of Poston if you've read about Arizona history. So he's sometimes called the father of Arizona, at least as an American territory. And the reason for that is he got this petition going. Now, W. Claude Jones' idea was to do just half and half Pimeria, but Charles Poston's idea was to make a new territory from the Gadsden Purchase. Again, if you've watched some of my stuff before, you know the Gadsden Purchase was all of Arizona below the Gila River and a little chunk of New Mexico. He thought that would make a great territory. So he and some of his friends, including W. Claude Jones, wrote this letter to Congress and were like, let's make this happen, let's make it a territory. And that's where W. Claude Jones got his claim to fame, because Charles Poston later said, however they came up with this, they were kicking around over beers or something one night, and W. Claude Jones was like, well, let's name this territory, or at least ask Congress to name this territory, Arizona. And now Arizona was a name for an area around where Charles Poston lived. Charles Poston was there because he was trying to restart some Spanish silver mines. They were dead as far as anybody knew, but he wanted to get them going again. And that area had been called Arizona by the Spanish. It was a Native American word. I believe it referenced streams in that area. There were some streams near these silver mines. There's a couple of different theories exactly what Arizona means. But anyway, W. Claude Jones, history geek, knew it was called Arizona, so let's call the territory Arizona. And that's why the territory got that name, and that is the first time that Arizona is named for some kind of political unit. But that didn't work out, that didn't happen, and W. Claude Jones' fortunes declined again because by this time Sarah Freeman had divorced him in Missouri, so he took a new wife who was a 12-year-old Mexican girl. And you're horrified and I'm horrified, but you might think by the standards of the day no one would be horrified. Well, actually the territorial delegate to New Mexico was horrified. He also didn't like W. Claude Jones because of that whole Pimeria idea. But anyway, he wrote to the president and was like, this guy can't be the attorney because he kidnapped a Mexican girl and made her marry him. That may not be true, the kidnapping thing, but also who really cares? It's icky anyway. But W. Claude Jones, knowing this opposition, and I guess really committed to this Mexican girl he may have kidnapped. Also, I keep saying Mexican girl because the historical record doesn't share her name. And of course, in the racist way of that time, that's how she was always referred to. But he resigned his commission as the attorney to continue to live with this Mexican girl that he married, and they went to Texas and got divorced not long thereafter. Don't know exactly how that happened. But bouncing back from that tragedy, he went back to the Arizona area and got back into boosting that as a territory because now there was a new player on the scene, the Confederacy. This gets us about to the time when the Civil War starts. And beforehand, the US, or what would become the Union, was not real interested in any additional territories because they'd have to figure out the whole thing whether it's going to be free or slave. So they just didn't want to deal with it. But the Confederates were very interested in having a new Arizona territory. So all those guys that had been in Arizona Club became real big Confederate boosters. And W. Claude Jones was one of them. He actually wrote a poem in praise of the virtues of the Confederate flag that appeared in a newspaper. So big Confederate all of a sudden. Part of the reason for that was he had his eye on the job of territorial delegate for the Confederacy, the Confederate Congress for Arizona. That didn't work out. Luck struck back against him again. He happened to be in Santa Fe when the Confederates actually invaded and took over that bottom part. They kind of adopted his plan and did East-West division. And while he was in Santa Fe, which was still held by the Union, they decided to arrest all the Confederate sympathizers. And again, he wrote a poem about the flag, so they knew, and he was thrown in jail. But then luck again shifted for him because the Confederates briefly captured Santa Fe. And while that was happening, he was released from jail. You can't be a Confederate sympathizer, or at least be imprisoned for being it if you're in the Confederacy. And he decided for some reason he was just done with the whole thing and was going to go to California. And again, for some reason I don't entirely know, he was going to go to California through Mexico. Well, while he was in Mexico, he was robbed blind by some bandits and just became a destitute, poor person for a couple of years and lived in what is modern Ciudad Juarez, just very poor and very sad. So, when the Civil War ended and that amnesty went out for former Confederates, he jumped on that immediately and wrote a very nice poetic letter about he was all wrong and he didn't really like the Confederacy anyway and he loved the Union. And they said, okay, you can come back, you're rehabilitated. And rehabilitated he was, not only his money, because he reconnected with his silver mining friends and his fortune bounced right back, but he also got back into politics. He was elected to the first Arizona Territorial Legislature as a delegate from Tucson, and actually then was selected to be the Speaker of the House for the legislature. So if you're into modern Arizona politics, I forget who the current Speaker of the House is, but that guy's predecessor, the first one, was this crazy dude. And he got into another scheme where he was going to make some historical stuff into a new thing because there was this big controversy right away. The legislature was meeting in Prescott, but there was a whole thing about where the actual territorial capital should be. A lot of people wanted it in Tucson because Tucson was the most well-established place, and then another faction just wanted it anywhere but Tucson because Tucson was too powerful. So W. Claude Jones comes up with this idea. He's like, guys, why don't we build a whole new capital? Now, I got a story to tell you. When I was coming up here, I saw some ruins on the Salt River. And there are Native American ruins there. You can see them to this day. And W. Claude Jones thought that those were Aztec ruins. That's not accurate. The Aztec Empire was never there, but that's what he thought. So he's like, I found these beautiful Aztec ruins. Why don't we make a new capital there? And we'll call it Aztlan, which is a Aztec word. I actually don't know what it means. So that's his whole thing where he's trying to do the Arizona thing. But lightning did not strike twice. There is no Aztlan, Arizona. People didn't like that idea. But Prescott was not a total bust for him. He got married again, wife number 3, Bing, to Carolyn Stevens, who was 15, dude had a type. And everybody loved it, partly because that's thought to be the first marriage ceremony ever performed in Prescott. And also everybody just got drunk because it was a great party, including the governor and all those people. And they apparently kind of gathered around their house and just sang at them drunk on their wedding night. And it was great. But I guess not great enough for W. Claude Jones, because not long after that, for some reason, he left Arizona just with absolutely no explanation. And this time he went to Hawaii, which was another kind of Wild West type place. He married Bing for the 4th time to a 14-year-old, keeping the trend going, named Meme Kalaho. She was apparently a Hawaiian princess of some type, and their marriage was very happy. His adventures were not yet over, though, because while he was there, he got in touch with this other adventurer, shifty dude who was from Italy, and they just became buddies because of that. And somehow, that guy got the attention of the king of Hawaii, who, I'm probably not going to pronounce this correctly, but I believe it's Kalakaua, the king of Hawaii at that time. And that guy really took to liking this Italian dude, and that guy then became the prime minister of Hawaii. And he said, I got this buddy who was originally from Arizona or wherever he's from, and he ought to be the attorney general. And the king was like, yeah, he ought to be the attorney general. So he became the attorney general of Hawaii, very briefly, because the colonial type powers, America and Britain and France, who had a lot of control over Hawaii, even before Hawaii was officially taken over by American types and then became a territory and a state, they thought this was a terrible idea, because it probably was, and they kind of sat the king down and were like, this is a terrible idea, you can't do this. And the king relented, and after 6 weeks, they all got fired, and he was no longer the attorney general. And then the last years of his life were kind of sad. His child bride, his 4th child bride, Meme, died at 28. He would marry one more time in his old age to a woman named Mary Akima, but divorced her not long thereafter because of rampant adultery, at least according to him, on her part, which is kind of sad. Kind of karma gets you, I guess. And about 6 months later, he would die after this final divorce, and there would be all kinds of obituaries in the Hawaiian papers that claimed all kinds of crazy things about this guy's life that may have been true, that certainly weren't true. Who knows? W. Claude Jones, the namer of Arizona. And with that, that concludes Andrew Explains It All. I'll see you next time.